A Nightmare on Elm Street, a soon-to-be 35-year-old film franchise. Over the years, Freddy Krueger has garnered rock star status, and by most respects, he is a legend of the genre, easily sitting atop the Mount Rushmore of slasher icons. It all started November 9, 1984. Now, most, not all, but most consider the original to be the best offering of the series. 10 movies later, this franchise has had its ups and downs. A lot of people love 3, New Nightmare has its following, and the rest fall where they may in popularity. But there was always one film in the franchise that stood out, and we didn't have to wait long to get it. It was the second film in the franchise, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. A lot has been said about this franchise, but when it comes to the second film, there is one common quote about it. Isn't that gay one? The writer of this film, David Chaskin, has come out and said that the underlying homo-eroticism was intentional. More than eroticism, it was meant to prey upon phobia. What better way to make a predominantly heterosexual young male audience uncomfortable than something that challenges their masculinity and sexuality? The film was a cult hit for many years, based on its notoriety as the gay one of the franchise, but in terms of mainstream popularity, it slipped out of the spotlight. But as we progress as a society, people are starting to take a new look at this film. Not in a snide way, but a way that appreciates a movie that was before its time. One such documentary that explores this and what happened to the star of the film, Mark Patton, is Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. I recently had a chance to sit down with Roman and Tyler to discuss their groundbreaking documentary and what the film legacy means to the horror genre and films in general. If you guys could introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about yourselves as filmmakers, and we'll just kind of start from there.
Sure. So my name's Roman. I'm one of the co-directors of Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street.
I'm Tyler Jensen. I'm the other co-director of Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street.
And we're both filmmakers. I'm also a sound engineer. Tyler's a fabulous editor, and we came together and started this movie about Mark Patton. And I think it's been about 5 years now since the doc was first birthed, and we are at Fantastic Fest, and it is our official premiere.
Very cool. And how did you guys get involved with this? Was it something that was kind of introduced to you guys, or was this your creation from the bottom up? How did this start?
It was Mark Patton who had kind of come back into the limelight and was teasing his story. It was just on social media. Just one night I realized I love this movie, I love this actor, and I don't know what happened to him. And I looked him up. I reached out to him on Facebook, and we just started talking about the production. It was just like I was drawn to his story, and I said I want to be a part of it. And we developed it together. I met Tyler. Tyler came on board. Like all of us, this was at a time where there wasn't a very strong and prominent gay horror community, so we were still kind of outcasts. And I think being able to recognize that in Tyler, I knew that he was someone that was perfect to be a part of this. I mean, everything he brought to it was amazing.
We were freelancing on this gay dating reality show, and I was editing, he was doing sound for it. We hadn't talked to each other, and we're editing in this tiny room, and I overhear him talking to the producer that he's about to start working on Scream Queen. He's going to make a documentary about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and my ears perked up. I lifted up my t-shirt and I showed him my Freddy phone tattoo, and I'm just like, I am your guy. I'm a huge nerd, and if you make this movie with anybody else,
it won't work.
It won't work. I'm the guy. I gotta help you.
So that was how it started.
So was this always your guys' favorite Nightmare on Elm Street, or is it just because it was something that had kind of a little bit more of a fascinating backstory to it that
It was my favorite. I saw it when it came out. I had a sleepover. It was the quintessential 80s experience. We were young kids. We have a sleepover. We're watching a scary movie. It was the first movie that made me love horror. And I was just obsessed with Freddy. I mean, everyone was obsessed with Freddy in the 80s.
Right.
But
interesting enough, I did not love this movie. In fact, I barely saw it. I came to the Nightmare series in the 90s. I was like second generation, like finding the threads through my older sister's video collection. And like I saw them all out of order. I loved part 4. I loved part 3. It was many years later that I finally saw the first one, and then I don't think I ever saw the second one because the negative reputation of the movie had already set in by the time I got to it. It was widely thought of as an inferior film, and it wasn't worth your time.
And how much of that do you think is homophobia, and how much is it that, you know, people maybe have different gripes with the movie? You know, I mean, Wes Craven, for example, didn't like the idea that Freddy would leave the dream world. You know, it wasn't anything on the other end of things with him. How much do you think that comes down to, you know, people's like fears and anxieties, and how much of it is about just some of the other things in the movie?
I think it would be 90-10. I think it's 90% homophobia. I think people were not able to articulate what it was what they were thinking, so it just got thrown in the trash heap of like, oh, it's a bad movie. But for a lot of people, especially when the gay subtext became a conversation, then they started to articulate it's bad because it's gay, and that's where we stepped in. So.
And I was always led to believe that it was to some degree accidental, or at least that a lot of people involved didn't realize it or get the subtext. Is there any truth to that? Because from the research I've done, I believe the writer has said that he was, you know, he knew exactly what he was doing with the script.
I mean, yeah, I think we touch on that on the film, and a lot in the last 5-10 years, it's been this blame game. Who knew what and who knew when? And I feel like we kind of wanted to take that out. It's not important so much. It's about what it allowed the culture to make the conversation. And it gave people a reason to dislike this movie unfairly.
Regardless of what their intentions were, it's how did you respond to it when it was presented to you? You know, first there's a lot of flip-flopping answers and a lot of stuff that you could really like put people in the corner and say, but you said this and there's this. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's just, this is what we got. This is how people feel about it, and this is what you said about it. So I think at this point, if there's any doubt that this movie has become sort of a, what did we say, a siren song for the queer community? I mean, it is, regardless of the intentions.
Yeah. I feel like a big part of it is Mark taking ownership of that. And for 3 decades, he was the butt of all jokes about Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And now that the culture has changed, and we're not like, oh, gay isn't stupid anymore. Gay isn't like worthy of being ridiculed. We're actually going to celebrate it now. It's like, who gets to take ownership of that, and who should really be celebrated now?
Exactly.
Yeah, and obviously, you mentioned Mark, and the documentary focuses, obviously quite a bit on, his struggles being after that movie. What was that like working with Mark, and what? Obviously, don't want to give too much away, because you guys, who watch this video, you should see the documentary without giving too much away. What were some of his insights about what he went through, after that movie for the rest of his career here?
It was an incredible insight. We have 3 different generations working on this film. I came late to the party, so I missed a lot of these things. So to meet Mark and be interviewing him for the last 5 years, I got a great firsthand knowledge from him of what it was like to live during that time period, to be gay, to be forced to live in the closet if you want to work, to be terrified to even go out for work because you're going to get a blood test if you sign a contract. You're going to... And then when Rock Hudson dies, like, the whole industry is going crazy. They don't want, closeted gay actors to kiss leading ladies. And so suddenly it's like people turning on each other. And that panic and that fear, we haven't heard enough of those stories yet. And I feel like we wanted to take Mark's story and tell it to the younger generation.
Yeah, I think also working with Mark on this, it's not like there was a resolution in place already. He was uncertain as to a lot of his feelings weren't fully realized yet. So we're on the journey with him. You know, it's not like he wasn't a fully healed person at that point. So we're going through this, and he's coming to these realizations after having confrontations and talks with different people. And, you know, it's being on that path with him, you can't help but do a little of that yourself. You know, I was a child in the 80s, and I remember the experience. It was a trickle down effect. The horror did touch me, but I wasn't quite old enough to be experiencing it the same way Mark was, and I wasn't in Hollywood. But it definitely is something that anyone from that time can understand on some level, because it was prevalent everywhere. You know, the homophobia, it was in movies, it was on TV, it was unchecked on the playground even, you know. So it was a everyday horror for a lot of us, and a lot of that I had buried.
We do revisit a lot of like our favorite popular films from that time period, where like the casual homophobia is a punchline, and that's not something you can really get away with. I mean, if you did it now in a movie, you would have an immediate backlash.
Right.
And yeah, and I find it interesting that you look at this series. You know, the first film introduced Johnny Depp. You know, Lawrence Fishburne, and the third one was Larry Fishburne. He wasn't, you know, a big star. Like in Mark is a very good actor, but it's a shame that these guys went off to superstardom and his career just completely stalled out after this movie.
Well, you have to also look at it this way: as a if Mark had been a straight male, he may have automatically been gifted the confidence to be able to trudge forward and get to that level. I mean, I think that what we take for granted is homophobia isn't just about being called names. It's about being made to feel less than, which chips away at your confidence that you need to be able to elevate to those levels if you can, if you're allowed to. So that's the difference. Is I don't think Lawrence Fishburne or Johnny Depp ever had to be made to feel less than in that way.
Right. Um, so yeah, I was shocked to see that, you know, in terms of when I saw that, oh, you know, it completely derailed my career. I was like, I don't know. I looked on IMDb because I assumed that he was, you know, still working around, and I see there was like an after school special after this film, and then nothing till like, you know, 25 years. Um, how much of that do you think is what he had to go through, uh, being a gay man as an actor, or do you think it was, oh, he's the guy from that gay horror movie, you know, or was it both that he had to
I
struggle?
don't necessarily know if that reputation was like that directly in 1985. I feel like the the queer reputation of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is definitely a much later phenomenon that the internet kind of brought out to the forefront, and that really started changing the conversation. At the time period, I just feel like, understandably, there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of pressure to be acting all the time. You're not allowed to be yourself. You are to be this persona, and anything that isn't marketable or valuable is to not exist, essentially. So there's an intense amount of pressure of that, and I don't feel like Mark wanted to suffer any fools.
I do think that it also affected his marketability, though. Like, so behind the scenes in Hollywood, when people, okay, even if it wasn't directly from Nightmare on Elm Street, being that he wasn't necessarily closeted in it, like pretending to have a girlfriend, right? So maybe he's just being tight-lipped about it, but he's still being living as a gay man. That's going to catch up to you in 1980s Hollywood. They're still going to say, "Oh, there he is at the gay bar. I'm not casting him." So when you're not able to, maybe you're not being, maybe it's not homophobia in your face, but it's definitely preventing you from getting the kind of jobs that you are good at. So it's like, okay, how bad do you want to be an actor? Are you going to do things that you don't want to do just because that's all that's available? So it could be, yeah, it could be either.
You know, just as an observation I had while thinking about, some of the questions and everything, is this one of the few slasher horror movies that actually improved with time and actually aged well?
Yeah, it's better with time. I mean, it's like the Halloween 3, essentially, where everyone hated it when it came out. And I think now that we're kind of starved for some of that, like, authentic, grittier horror, the stuff that had, like, more attention to detail and writing, the story had more layers to it. I think we're liking that now, because after Halloween 4, 5, 6, beyond, you kind of look back and you're like, oh, actually, I think I was being an asshole. That actually is a pretty good movie. So nostalgia has helped.
I like that you said that, because Halloween 3 is actually my favorite.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the
Great
music.
score. Oh my god.
Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, 1 and 2 both have a kind of similar aesthetic to them. And so, it's not just that those were the ones that I first saw because I was there at the time, but also I prefer the fact that it wasn't, I like the atmosphere, and you don't get a lot of that atmosphere in the later ones.
Yeah. So what do you guys think of, the idea that he was essentially the first male scream queen, and the fact that, we even today we don't really see that often, and like how monumental was that?
I think it was, super ahead of its time. I don't think even now we would be ready for it. There was a part of the film that we had to cut out because it didn't quite gel well with the rest of the narrative. It's that in our culture, if you ever see a man scream in a movie, it is played for comedy. Your initial reaction is to laugh at it rather than to like empathize with it. And it's almost in any movie. If it's Dumb and Dumber, when he's being jokingly caressed in a bathroom stall and it becomes like a gay panic thing and he's screaming so loud, the audience is laughing. And that is kind of
Men aren't allowed to be weak, period. And it's comedy.
And I mean this next question with all sincerity. I don't want anybody to think I don't. But is this one of the deepest like slasher horror films ever made?
Deepest? I
like the underlying subtext. Sorry.
Right,
go.
Right. I do think that if you look at it as the nightmare of a queer person realizing that they are gay and not being comfortable with that, especially in 1985 when AIDS epidemic is dominating the news cycle and you're seeing gay people only represented on television as having AIDS, as being diseased and dying. And in your head, you just connect the two. And if you're growing up and you're realizing that, oh my God, I'm different, I'm that, like, if this is all I see represented of this subculture or this otherness, and I definitely don't want to be that. Like, you have that internal terror, and I feel like this movie is brilliant at capturing that only kind of gay people who experience that will understand.
Yeah. I definitely think it's probably, I mean, if you're talking about intention, I'm not sure, but it definitely is one of the most, it gives it a layer that most of them don't, Most of them were pretty surface. I mean, there might be a monster that was surreal. It might go into this imaginary realm. But it's hard to find that sort of analogy or parallel in slasher movies, period, because they just never developed their characters enough for that to be possible.
Right. I mean, Freddy Krueger is only in like 10, 15 minutes of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Yeah. They're given a lot of time to follow Jesse's character and empathize with him. So I don't necessarily think a lot of other slasher movies at that time period were doing a lot of character development.
Except for your favorite.
Prom Night 2. Hello, Mary Lou.
Prom Night 2. Okay, I'm gonna have to add that one to the list. I love Prom Night.
To
see Prom Night 2.
Yeah, it's great.
Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2 is the lesbian sister of Jesse's Revenge. It is just full of.
You're gonna see a lot. If you watch it, you'll see a lot of stuff that you're like, wow, it's gotta have subtext in every scene.
Yeah, they have a female Freddy Krueger as the main villain, and she literally scrapes her nails across the lockers. And I'm like,
it's like a dream killer that comes into the real world. It's great, and there's a lot of gender and sexual issues. She's very sexual in that movie, and in the 80s, that was such a difficult topic.
But in today's rewatching of it, you're like, oh, absolutely, she should be allowed to be that free and that sexual.
Yeah.
And she shouldn't be a villain.
So there aren't a lot, but there are a couple, and I do think, back to back as the boy and the girl version, I think there is another one out there, but I can't make claims as to what their intentions were.
Well, of course, we can show violence, but anything of a sexual nature is it's too scary. Yeah.
Which is, I think the beauty of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is that for a lot of queer people who didn't have access to queer stories, or just naked men in a popular movie, when you're a gay teenager, you can see titties and everything. And then to actually see a naked male in a horror movie, like, oh my God, like that's a first. Like, queer kids had latched onto this film because it's all they had. It was accessible. And for those who weren't comfortable with themselves yet, it allowed them to hide a little bit, hide that joy that they found in Jesse, because their parents just thought they were renting a horror movie. They didn't think they were renting Brokeback Mountain or Call Me By Your Name. It was like, that would out you immediately if you were seen watching it.
Plus, when you identify with characters, it makes the horror scarier. If you're watching it for that entertainment, then you can have that same experience. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And, speaking of being able to rent it and, possibly say, this is something that I can relate to, what do you guys think of the idea the movie takes place in suburbia, that, it's not the ignorance of, well, those people are in San Francisco. It's like, no, they're your families. They're in your neighborhoods. And kind of saying that, I feel that's kind of breaking to some degree through the closet and saying that, like, these are our families. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I grew up in suburbia outside of San Francisco, and even being close to the city, it was still like you're still trapped in a nightmare, essentially. Any place where it's been it's set up to be safe means that you're kind of isolated in a certain way. So as gay kids, you live with this horror of people not understanding you, possibly people inflicting violence on you, but also that there's nowhere for you to go. I mean, the whole Nightmare series was based on the separation of kids and parents in that suburban situation.
Yeah.
You're on your own, and how are you going to get through this, essentially? You're not out in the woods, because everybody can get lost in the woods. This is specifically a division between the younger and older generation, and that makes it a little scarier, because now no one can take care of you. You got to grow up fast, I guess.
Gotcha. So what's next for you guys in terms of like your schedule? I know that you have some screenings coming up pretty darn soon, and for quite a while.
Our official U.S. premiere is right here in Austin, Texas for Fantastic Fest. We have a full day tomorrow. We're doing a live podcast recording. They show Scream Queen. They show the 35 millimeter print of Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And then we have a drag ball hosted by Peaches Christ after party.
And then a 30 stop tour so far.
Right.
So it's going to be crazy. So we have other things in the works, but we have a whole year of tour with this movie, which we're really grateful for.
Our soundtrack LP just got pressed and delivered to us today to start selling tomorrow.
Hot pink vinyl.
I saw that.
Cool. Yeah. So there's a lot going on. We're only just starting this week, really.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exciting.
The offers are on the table, and we're gonna have a little battle. The film is exponentially more exciting in the theater with an audience. You hear everyone laugh together. you hear the air get sucked out of the room at the very end, and Mark's Q&A is
Always lively.
very lively.
Yeah.
All right, well, guys, thank you so much for giving me your time here to talk about the movie, and I'm gonna make sure we put something up at the end so people know like when it's coming their way or where they can check it out. But yeah, if you have the means, please check out Screen Queens. This is a awesome film, and I'm looking forward to when you guys come to Pittsburgh and just all the great things that are going to be coming with the film.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
Cool.